Makes sense? Okay, so you guys just busted your butts. So this isn't like a super strenuous class. It's purely theoretical, right? And also I want to say that was really cool to watch you guys do this big interval at like an event without me like being the driving force with any of that stuff. So
Thank
hats
you,
off
Elra.
to you guys. That's pretty cool.
Thank you, Elra.
Thank you, Elra. That was an achievement. I think the way that we've changed the fighting culture is super exciting to be a part of that. But anyway, let's not get too sappy. We're here to get work done, right?
Yeah.
So, combat mathematics, right? What we're going to think about in this class, you guys have been doing these intervals, right? And you've been doing these drills and these fights, and the structure of intervals kind of gets your subconscious mind thinking about like how to change your game, how to do more efficient things by like very rapidly giving you reinforcement, punishment, and things like that when you do the wrong thing, right? And it's kind of unconscious. You kind of just do the drill and trust the paradigm to show you what you're doing wrong. And you guys have faithfully stuck to that. You guys are making good progress. However, we can enhance that rate of improvement by equipping ourselves with conscious tools that help us figure out how we make mistakes, right? So when I talk about combat mathematics, I'm not going to big dry erase board and start running equations or anything like that. By mathematics, we're going to refer to geometry, like the kind of space that we take up, the space of possibilities that are capable of happening in combat. How to think about those possibilities, and we're also going to think about
come over this way.
And statistics and choice making, right?
You need to keep
so
Tato
what
facing
this
the
does,
light.
like a lot of, if you guys ever read like series foam fighters, right? That forum where everyone's talking theory. Like this is theory, but I have an idea that without practical applications, theory's kind of useless, right? Like unless we can do something with what we're talking about, really we're just talking just to talk if we can't get results and actions out of it, right? So what I'm going to teach you guys is just a series of kind of piecemeal mental frameworks that's going to help you see, oh, that's why I got hit. It's going to be able to help you rewind the fight and say, this is where my hand needed to be. This is where my body needed to be, right? That's our goal for this class. That nobody pictures like the cone of attack or the sphere of range or anything while they fight. But after you kill someone or get killed, this gives you a way to say, oh, I think this might be why this happened. And it's going to give you just some direction on how to plan out your next fight. Does that make sense to you guys? So that's what I want you guys to take from this. This is just a way to think about fighting that's going to help guide you to make those improvements consciously instead of just hitting it and letting that do the work. And the ability to analytically break down what's going on in fighting takes you to a whole new level. And if you don't understand quite what I'm talking about, it's okay to hit me with questions while we do this. If you can't quite picture these things in your head as we go through them, like just take time and think about it, and eventually maybe, hey, like it'll pop open and you'll start to understand. Like I remember when I was taught the cone of attack, I didn't understand it until I was trying to employ it for like a while, right? So just don't feel like, oh, I can never get this if you don't quite get what I'm talking about. Ask those questions. Ask them, and we'll explore it together, right? So the first thing we're going to do is a real quick grip checkup, right? So I want you guys to just hold your sword in the air and show me how you hold your sword. Hold your arm straight out and show me how you hold your sword. And be honest about it. You know, don't change your grip now, right? So let's take a look. So if your arm is straight out, where should your sword be pointed? Should be 45 degrees forward, right? This is Saber Grip, right? If your sword's straight up like this is called Filipino grip, right? We want to use Saber Grip because it extends our hand and our sword out and also gives us some interesting angles. So the way to check in to Saber Grip, the way that I learned how to do it, is you kind of take your finger, index finger, and line it up like this, and then kind of collapse it over like that, wrap your fingers around it, and settle in so it's sitting diagonally. So if I have a straight line like this, as straight as I can get it, drawing with my left hand, right? If I'm holding this, open my hand, you see how that line is still sort of like wiggling straight this way, it's straight this way, right? So make sure that you're in that grip, because what that does is we're going to talk about our first shape, right? It's a very basic shape. And the cool part about this shape, in my opinion, is it explains how wrap shots work, right? It's called the triangular plane of the sword. So if you're in Saber Grip, right, you'll notice the lines that we've got here, right? We've got this forearm line going this way, and then this sword going this way. Well, we have another line here, right? It's the line between our elbow and the sword, which is kind of the hypotenuse of this right triangle, right? So can I get someone who's not afraid to be drawn on with this marker to stand up? Let's get Ren up here. I am going to draw on you with this. So, not very much. So, basically, if, hold your sword out, hold your sword straight out to me. Hold out like this. Okay, cool. So, the triangular plane of the sword, what this explains to us, right? You switch here so the camera can see us a little bit. No, just stand right here, face me. Okay, what this explains is that if I chop this way, right, since we're going straight through this line, the triangle, it can't hit it, right? But if I try to move that line out of the way, I can catch her on the outside here by putting her guard, her hand, inside of that triangle without touching this edge or this edge, right? So that explains why does this wrap shot go around. And like, you might look at me and think like, hey, it goes around because it's a wrap shot. Mike, please, you're overcomplicating this. But having these kind of structural frameworks starts to show us how we can begin to hit other people through a variety of options, right? So if I understand that that's true, like I get her hand inside this triangular plane, right? You see how like this line connecting here to my elbow, her hand is like through that triangle. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
Okay, so like I'm seeing some no, that makes no sense, Tato, and that's cool. That's fine. We'll explain it again. So like we have a line, right? And then we have this imaginary hypotenuse, which isn't like a physical space, so it won't bump her guard, right? So if you imagine this triangle here, like if there was a piece of string connecting a sheet, like flat here, right? You have to kind of imagine it like the spokes of like a bat's wing. Like if I had some kind of like leathery, goofy substance here, right? Does that make sense? Like I should just make that as a visual aid. That would be cool next time. So if I put her guard inside that like sheet, like that plane, that flat plane, right? Since it's not like a physical space, if her hand is like up here, and I put her, you can see, if you keep imagining that like bat's wing, right? Her hand is shoved through that, right? Like if I was a bat, we would have torn my wing out right now, right? That's what I mean by getting inside of that plane. So if I don't get her guard inside of that while I swing, right, the physical space just kind of bumps into it. So it's literally that change in angle, right, here that makes it go around. And I can do that low by going low too, right? If I come around with a reverse wrap like this, you see how her pommel is inside that weird leathery fruit bat wing, right? Does that start to make a little bit of sense to you? Okay, so here's a cool exercise that you guys can do. And this is sort of a form of shot creation, but it's more like swing creation, right? I'm gonna draw on your arm. Okay, so we have a point on her arm, like this, right? So we're gonna just look at the whole arm, but it's literally just this part of her forearm. So I'm gonna draw a ring around here, right? To just represent the point that I'm trying to hit in general. So go ahead, show them your ring.
Nice bracelet.
So if I'm swinging at that, right, and her guard is up, I can't swing straight through this, right? Like I have to go around somehow. I have to manipulate that space somehow. So like I showed you, I can come up here, and I can come down here to get around it, right? Well, you start thinking to yourself, like, what else can I do to get around that, right? Like, in any way that I can get her hand inside of that plane, I can get around her guard with some kind of wrap shot, right? So start thinking about it this way, like, this is me trying to go through her hand and it won't work. But if I get her hand inside of this plane, now it's inside, like I could hit her like this, right? And I'm like, well, how would I hit this as a swing? I'm gonna work it backwards, right? I'm gonna come down here and then flip up like that. And oh, I just came up with a different kind of wrap shot because I went from the target that I wanted to hit, thought about that triangular plane, and went backwards, right? If I wanted to come here, right? Like this is an easy shot, but what if I want to make sure that I want to wrap? Like I'm down here like this. What would I do if I wanted to make sure her hand was inside that plane?
Come back to here.
I could step this way, right? Are you still picturing that plane? Right, so I can start thinking about, hey, I want to get around that way. Swinging like that won't work. If I shift down this way, now I can get an arm inside of that plane. Does that make sense? So what I want you to do is get with the partner, right? And this is going to be a little weird and a little bit exploratory. And I'll come around and just check up if you see what I'm talking about. But I want you to kind of examine all of the ways that you can hit about this point on her arm. Like, hey, if I want to go over top, right, and her hand's like right here, like what do I need to do? I could come this way, I could move this way and throw around that way. I could even move this way and come around this way. I want you to just kind of take like all the angles and be like, I can hit like here, 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 and kind of reverse engineer that shot. Be like, hey, I'm gonna throw this kind of flat slap in here. How do I get around? I'm gonna shift. I'm gonna maybe put my arm up here and then reverse engineer the end position, right? And say, how am I gonna start this shot? So go ahead and try that. Does that make sense? So start with that end position, put their hand inside that plane, and pull back and see, how can I create that shot? How can I create that angle? Go ahead. It's a little airy and a little weird, but I want you guys to start thinking about shapes. Start thinking about shapes.
Go back up.
So that's basically an introduction to some of the geometry that we're going to look at. And if you don't quite understand like how that was supposed to work, basically it's just a high-level explanation. It's a high-level explanation for why those wrap shots work, right? So the next thing we're going to look at, we're going to look at more shapes, right? And you need to be able to visualize these shapes in the air as I explain them, right? So the next shape that we're going to talk about is the sphere of range, right? And I'm going to explain why that's a sphere to you guys. So right now we're considering like, hey, what is the maximum, what's my maximum reach, right? Like, what does that mean, max reach?
It's as far as you can extend your sword and hit someone.
Yeah, it's the furthest away I can hit someone. Why don't you come up and we'll start talking about max reach, right? So my max reach, they're flat to me like this. My max reach, right?
Can y'all turn a little bit?
Line. And you'll notice how it's not, it's this straight line here, right? And you'll notice how it's not a straight line like this. It's just in that saber grip, a chop forward like that, right? And what we want to start thinking about is like, hey, wait a minute. Like, I know that, and I know the things that I can hit, but what are all of the things I can hit at any given moment? Like, what does that look like, right? Well, we need to start thinking about a swing. Well, what does a swing look like? Like, what shape is a swing?
An arc.
A single swing. What shape is it?
An arc.
It's an arc, right? You swing in an arc like this. So an arc is a part of a circle, right? So if I'm vertically chopping at this guy, you can see how I hit his chest like that, right? And that radius, like from the midpoint of the circle to the furthest point, that radius basically comes down like that, right? Well, why is it called the sphere of range? Well, you'll notice that, like, if I swing vertically, right, it's got this nice round C shape in front of me because my arm is just traveling along that radius. If I swing horizontally, what does that shape look like?
Same.
It's still an arc, right? It's still moving the same way. If I swing with a rising chop, what does it look like? It's still an arc. If I swing diagonally down, still an arc. This way, still an arc. Bear paw, still an arc, right? So if we start thinking about all of the things that I could swing at once, every possible path that this sword can take, it looks like tons of arcs, right? It looks like a flat arc, and we take it and spin it, and it forms a dome in front of us, right? So it's like, I obviously, like, I can't go back this way. My pecs are much too tight for that. I really need to stretch. So it's like a half of a dome, in front of us. But no one wants to talk about the hemisphere of range because the Earth is flat. Hemispheres are beyond our comprehension. So anyway, the sphere of range, right? You kind of want to imagine yourself in a hamster ball, right? Like that's what you can reach. Now, when you start thinking about like, hey, what's everything I can reach? You start like what that's composed of. You start unlocking all kinds of abilities to manipulate that space and understand what that means. And I know that that's like a kind of an airy explanation, but let's walk through it, right? So if I'm walking towards Fezzik, what's the first thing that I can reach on his body if I don't lean over or bend my knees? Like if I just like, I'm on a little conveyor belt, like the Jetsons, I come forward. What's the first thing I can hit on this dude? Basically, whatever's in line with my shoulder, right? Which happens to be his chest, right? Or I guess his shoulder, but his chest sticks out a little bit. But you see, that's the first thing that intersects this, right? Like, he's not inside of that sphere. He's like on the outer edge of it. So if I try to hit Nick in the balls, I can't do it. If I try to hit him in the face, I can't do it, right? But I can't hit him in the chest because his face and his hips, they're not in the sphere at that point, but his chest is. Does that make sense? So if I wanted to hit his hips at max range, what would I do? Please speak loudly for me.
Drop your knees.
Yeah, I would drop at the knee, right? So like, if I drop and I open up a little bit at the knee, basically what's happening is I'm taking that whole sphere, which is fixed at my shoulder, and I drop down. Now I can hit him in the body. Can I hit him in the chest from this location? No, I can't. Like I miss, right? So you have to start understanding, like all of the things that you can swing at, basically is on the line of that sphere. Does that make sense? Okay, so what happens is we get closer than max range. If I step in, what happens?
Target area expands.
I can reach more stuff, right? Because he's inside of that sphere. Like if I'm right here, now I can hit everything, right? And of course, since Fezzik and I have similar reaches, he can hit everything now too. Does that make sense to you guys? So you have to think about like, what can I reach and what can't I reach, right? So this explains why when someone switches their feet this way, when you attack them, right, and they throw a counter, that's why your sword just travels through and whiffs in the air. It's because they moved their body outside of that sphere. Does that make sense? This also helps to explain, actually, let's just walk through it. Like, okay, we're fighting. Put your hand up, right? Hand up like this. So maybe his arm is just inside of that sphere, right? Just inside of my sphere. Like I hit it here, I can hit it here. What if I move this far to the left? Sorry, my right, his left. Can I reach his hand anymore? No. I can hit his hand. I can't hit his arm anymore, right? So let's move back here where I can reach him. What happens if I shift to my left? Now I can hit more of his arm now, right? You see how it's coming up like that? So when you start picturing how this sphere kind of tracks through the air and develops more of his body, you can start saying like, hey, I need to be in this position to hit people. So what does that actually kind of describe about the sphere? Like, where is the sphere's center point? Is it in the center of my body? No, if it was in the center of my body, that effect wouldn't really happen, right? Like, it's actually the center point is on my shoulder. So if you're Florentine, right, you have two spheres. You have a sphere attached to each part of your body. And it starts to explain like why I could hit him with one side of my hand, like one hand, and not the other side, right? So that's basically what the sphere of range is, right? So I want you guys to get together with your partner again. I want you guys to just kind of explore that space at your max range, right? I want someone to stand flat, right? And he's gonna go, okay, well, what can I reach from where I'm standing? And be careful to not like close accidentally or lean when you swing. And just kind of move around your partner and be like, hey, like if I shift this way, there's more things open up. If I shift a little bit closer, can I hit him? And go ahead and just don't hit anybody in the face, but just go ahead and explore that range. That makes sense? Go ahead. Just think about it. It's weird to think about shapes. Does that connect? Like, check what connects given like where you're standing in space. where your height is, where your weight is. Just be like, hey, if I lean this way, what can I reach here? Can I reach this top part? Can I reach his hip? Can I reach the offside chest? Can I reach the offside arm? Like, what can I reach from this position? End up getting a little bit loose and a little bit goofy with that and checking out some like weird positions and start thinking about like, hey, can I hit this if I'm like bent over
Come
like
over this way.
Like, can I hit this if I'm like
we're
sitting in the
parallel with
bottom
this.
of a squat? You know what I mean? And like, you might think like, hey, I never fight this way. I'm never going to take this position. But it's worth understanding because like, what is that? Your opponent takes that position against you, right? You want to be able to intrinsically understand what they're doing and what they can hit when you do that. So let's go back. Like, let's go back to, you remember how I was walking towards Fezzik and showing you that as I close in, my sphere of range encompasses more and more of your body. Does that remind you guys of anything? Like any of the drilling that we've done?
Counterwalk.
ABA.
BAB.
ABA,
Like
BAB.
a bunch of them.
What about Blockstrike? What about the way that we divide Blockstrike up into different quadrants, right? Michael, stand up. So, for those of you that Blockstrike with us, you basically have an understanding that if we have Michael here and we split him down the middle and we split him right under the base of the rib cage, we have 4 quadrants, right? Well, in a typical fight, like I'm not going to try to fight him like in this position. In a typical fight, we're going to slowly close towards each other like that, right? And whatever's in line with my shoulder is typically what intersects into that sphere first, right? So that's where you get top quadrants first, right? As I move closer and closer into him, that dome runs in those top quadrants first until I either dip down like this to be able to reach those low quadrants or move closer and be able to reach all of those quadrants, right? And that's why we divide Blockstrike up into top quadrants and then low quadrant shots, which teach you to switch from low to high, because that's how this sphere change works. Like, that's the rationale of dividing it up in that way. Yes, ABA and BAB, they really incorporate this too, but I feel that the division in Blockstrike is what highlights this the most, because that first range is that top quadrant range where I can hit these 2 parts of him, but I can't hit his hips. That makes sense to you guys? Yeah. All right, so we're gonna get a little bit more practical now, because I know that some of you guys are like, Tato, like this is the most self-indulgent class I've ever heard of. So let's get into some more practical stuff. And it might seem a little bit like, oh, he's going off into something weird, but this really helps you look back at fights you've lost and start to say, oh, he wasn't in my sphere, I was in his sphere. You know what I mean? It helps you start piecing those fights back together. So now we're going to talk about ranks, right? And since you're up here, we're going to use you. So we have four ranges. Actually, I only used to teach 3. So what's the first range in a fight? Where do I stand? Like, we tap in, right? What do we always do?
Outside.
Goes back up, right? So we always move back into the safe zone, right? And the definition of the safe zone is the zone in which neither opponent, neither of them, can hit the other one without taking a big step forward first, right? So, like, you'll notice that, I'm gonna blow out my elbow if I keep teaching with this arm. You'll notice that I can't hit him here, right? Is this a safe zone?
No.
No, this isn't the safe zone, because if I move that far forward, I could hit him, right? The safe zone is a little bit further back. So this is the safe zone, because I can't, okay, that was a little bit. The microphone's feeling a little better. This is the safe zone. So I can't get in there with 1 step and hit him. I have to take a second step, right? So the safe zone, believe it or not, even though it seems like nothing happens there, is the most important range. Is what am I gonna do out here, right? I'm gonna hang out, and I'm gonna say, okay, well, what's Mike gonna do, right? This is the part of the fight where I get to plan. This is the part of the fight where I get to read Mike's behavior, his stance, his posture. I'm like, okay, well, his toe isn't lined up on me, right? Like, it's pointed a little bit off this way. It's not pointed straight towards me. So he's gonna have trouble if I step off this way to fight him, right? That's something that I could pick up just looking at him. Right? Or I'm like, okay, well, his hand is up high like this, right? So he's terrified of me. I know, we're like, just like a fighting posture, right? Like if you're back like this, he's loaded up like he's gonna swing at me as soon as I go in, right? So when I'm at this safe zone, I can do two things. I can examine what he's gonna do, and I can make my own plans, right? This is where fights are won. Fights are won in the safe zone by making good plans. That makes sense to you guys? So the other things that you could do in the safe zone, that's like if I stutter in like this and try to like get him to jump, I can maybe read his hand, or if he's gonna step offline, maybe he'll do it. Like if I come in and he steps off to the left and he don't come in, I can be like, oh, he's gonna go left, maybe I can go right. Let me see if he does that again. And he does it again. Now I can start kind of building off of that plan, right? So that safe zone is where we start reading people, right? What's the opposite of the safe zone?
Danger zone.
It's the exchange zone. It's where we can hit each other, right? It's the exchange zone is kind of like named after Blockstrike, right? Blockstrike practices exchanging. So what that means is, and this is nice because we're similar heights. I think Mike's a little taller than me. Unless we're on like a dating app, then I'm like a couple inches taller than I am. But if we're in this exchange zone, that means that we can both hit each other equally, right? Like I can hit his hip, he can hit my hip, I can hit his arm, he can hit my arm, I can hit his chest, he can hit my chest, right? We're equal here, right? This is where you do your block strike. This is where you grind things out with full combination. So when you're in here, can you do planning? No, it's way too late, right? You're gonna lose if you can't, if you don't have a good plan and you haven't done more block strike than the other guy. Should you be here? No. No, right? So like one problem that we see with like kind of shorter fighters, and I was super guilty of it too for many, many years, it's like if you have, give me Messias. Thanks. Messias. So Messias is tall as hell, right? Messias is almost as tall as I am on my Tinder. So, he can reach me long before I can reach him, right? Like I can hit his arm, but I can't really hit his chest yet, right? So he has a huge advantage of me, right? So the common mistake that short fighters make is if I manage to get into this exchange zone where we can hit each other mutually, right? I'm gonna hang out here because I feel like, you know, I'll never be able to get into the exchange zone again, right? So what I want you guys to do with the exchange zone is you execute your plan, defend yourself, and leave, right? Because if I come in on Messias, I'm like, all right, like I'm short, I got this, I can hit him everywhere, right? What if he's done more block strike than me? Does that mean he should automatically win? No, not if I'm smart. Like not if I outplan him, right? So I want you shorter fighters who need to close into that exchange zone to remember, right? Remember, you can always close again. You can always get into the exchange zone again. Don't hang out in the danger zone. Because like, you have to notice that our exchange zones kind of aren't equal, right? Like if I'm here, I can hit Messias in the shoulder, but if he throws a wrap shot, he can hit me in the flat of the back, like if he wants to, right? Because his dome is much bigger than mine, right? His arms are longer. What else can affect the size of that dome?
Lunging.
Like what else, I'm sorry, not the dome. What else can affect that range? Other than height?
Sword length.
What?
Sword length.
Sword length can affect that. What else?
Taking a step.
Taking a step?
Leaning.
Does everyone take the same length of steps?
No.
No, some people are faster than other people, right? So you can start making a value judgment here where you can be like, okay, well, like Messias squats, you know, and I squat on my Tinder too, but maybe he could step further than I can too. So maybe I'm closer into his exchange zone than I think, right? So you need to understand that like these zones aren't hard, fast, like areas. They could change. What if we've been fighting all day? Is he gonna be able to take the same length of step at 7 p.m. that he could at 2? No, that's gonna vary, right? So I want you guys to keep in mind that these zones, they change in size. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so that brought up another interesting point. There's a third zone, right? It's called the bias zone. The bias zone is where one opponent can hit the other opponent, but the other one can't respond in the same way, right? Everyone has a bias zone, right? It's most visible when you have someone short and someone tall. So put your sword out. Put it on my chest. So I can't hit his chest right yet, so stay this way. And if I kind of sneak in here, from here to here, right? That's how big that bias zone is. So I have to be able to power through this much space on the outside. So basically on the end of his exchange zone, there's this much space. I better not go there, right? I better have a plan to get through that bias zone because he can hit me in more locations than I can hit him. Does that make sense? So it's bias zone. So all right, safe zone, bias zone, exchange zone. That makes sense? There's one more space. I used to teach this combat geometry class years ago. I never really thought about countering, right? So what does that mean? Do you think there's a zone where we can fight each other that we might be equal, that's not close up?
If you're at off angles to each
What?
other? If you're at off angles to each other?
If you're off angles to each other, that's one way that you could change that, right? Because if he's facing forward to me, right? Like now my range might be longer. That's a good point. Is you put that sword forward and that foot, yeah, just hold out like this, right? Well, he's dome shaped, right? Like the things that he can reach is shaped like a dome. So if you just stay facing in this direction, I'm gonna shift offline. Now if I shift online like this, like I can hit him in the chest now, don't move your body, and he can't hit mine now too, right? So that's why lateral movement is really powerful, and that's a really good example. It wasn't quite what I was looking for, but that's just like the next note, so good job. I'm guessing the next part of the class should have put this note there. Is there a zone where we're equal? Okay, well, what are the rules for tournaments? What's a typical sword length?
36.
36 inches, right? So are swords the same length? Probably. Right? Same length. So, oh, wait a minute. We both have to hit each other with our arms, right? Hold your sword straight out. So if I start coming in this way, we're going to hit each other in the wrist at about the same time, right? So if I'm further away from him, I can hit him at about the same time that he can hit me, right? It's about the same amount of space. Now here's a question for you. So that's called the counter zone, right? That's where we can hit someone's outstretched arm. Is that zone always available to you? No. When is it available?
With their arms outstretched?
It's only available when they swing, right? So what you could do is, if you don't want to close into the exchange zone, you could try to get him to swing and see if you can hit him inside of that counter zone from a little bit further away. And if it doesn't necessarily work, like if he throws out, maybe I have a chance now, if I didn't get hit, to slip in to that exchange zone where I can hit him, right? So what are my 4 zones? Safe zone, exchange zone, bias zone, counter zone. So I'm gonna put those in order for me, from furthest away from the opponent to closest. What's the order?
Safe zone, bias zone, counter zone, exchange zone.
No.
Ah, I'm sucky.
Safe zone, counter zone, bias zone, exchange zone. Close. Because remember, if he has his sword out, oh, sorry.
I had just turned it.
If
Sorry.
he has his sword out, right, he can't reach my chest yet, right? So I'm not really in any more danger than he is,
That's true.
right? We get hit each other about the same amount of space. If I get any closer, then I can hit this arm stone, counter that, but I have way less options than he does, right? Safe zone, counter zone, bias zone, exchange zone. So here's a weird exercise for you guys, since we're getting as weird as possible. You're gonna square off with a partner, right? And I am going to close my eyes, and Mazeus is just going to move to a different location while my eyes are closed. Obviously not like out in the freaking woods, like I don't want to look for him. Obviously not behind me, because we're not like sweet ninja assassins or anything like that. But he's gonna change his position in space, right? So I'm gonna close my eyes and count to 3, and he's gonna move, and I'm gonna guess what zone he's at. So ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think that this is the exchange zone. So I think that I could probably hit his lower body. Yeah. And he can hit my lower body because he's taller than me. I know that for sure. I can hit his shoulders. I think he can hit my shoulders, right? Yeah. So that's exchange zone. So I'm gonna do it again. Actually, you close your eyes this time, and I'm gonna move.
1, 2, 3.
Where do you think we are?
I think this is bias zone.
This is bias zone. Can you hit my body? I can't hit your body. Bias zone, right? So get with somebody, preferably that's a different height than you. Try that exercise 5 times. That makes sense? Any questions? Questions on how to do that?
have to abandon this 5 minutes.
And talk about it. Talk about where you think you are and try to explain it to each other. We had a really good question. And this is actually some of the harder parts of processing fighting. It was Rock's question. He asked, if I could take a bigger step than my opponent, do I have the bias zone? The answer to that is yes, because you can take more range by lunging forward, right? So that's another thing that you have to take into account. We are not just looking at how long a dude's arms or swords are. We have to start building some thought processes of how far can they step as well. That makes sense? Did you guys get through the different zones?
Yes.
Does that make sense to you guys, right? That's probably the most practical part of the class. It's easiest to apply. But the zones have very clear purposes, right? You have safe zones, your planning, your analysis. Exchange zone is your execution, where you can hit the other dude evenly, right? Bias zone is the zone where you don't want to be if you're short. And bias zone is the zone where you want to hold your opponent if you're taller, right? And then counter zone is the first zone that you need to interface with. You have to mess around with the timing and see if you can get into it, right? So you would apply the counter zone if you want to fight someone really tall and try to get into their range or hit them without having to close through that bias zone. You would use the counter zone, like if you don't think someone's going to feint on you and they're just going to throw a straight shot, you might use that counter zone to fight them that way. Does that make sense? So a little practical application of this stuff, I said, if you die when you're fighting, you need to think about, was I in the zone that I thought I was in? Because I tell you, sometimes you're not. Like sometimes you might find like, oh shit, like I thought I was in the safe zone, but I was really in Messiah's bias zone, and it hit me. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you guys? So that's how you start thinking about that. So the next shape, right? Now we're gonna get real weird. So we're gonna talk about the cone of attack, right? And this is my favorite part of the class because I get to play with toys. So the cone of attack, right, is a subsection of that sphere, right? And the shape for this thing, can I get Hobie? Yes. I love this part. This is my favorite. So basically the cone of attack is a subsection of that sphere, right? He has to be within the sphere to be inside that cone of attack. So the cone of attack has obviously a point, like any good cone of ice cream does, which is the best part if you had those like chocolate dipped ice cream cones, because it's got all the chocolate in the bottom, right? Best part, that point of your cone is in your shoulder, right? The base, the broad part of the cone, comes out and encompasses Hobie's shoulders, right? But why is that the case, and why do we need to think about that? There's a couple of reasons, right? Well, first off, we need to prove that this cone exists, so I'm not just being self-indulgent by overcomplicating fighting. So basically, my sword has to come back inside of that cone to be able to hit Hobie, right? So if I swing outside here and I don't come back into that cone, I'm not going to win any fights this way, no matter how hard I train, right? I have to put my sword back into this cone. And you're like, okay, well, that's great, Tato. Yes, I have to swing at my opponent to hit him. Thanks for believing in me, Tato. But I'm going to show you what that's shaped like, and I'm going to show you guys why we use this. Now, this band is heavier than the other one. So if you mess up, this is going to snap you in the face real hard, so just be careful. Okay, this is like a jump stretch band, and what you do is you put it like on the floor on a bench press to like make it heavier, like that. The one that I did the original video one, which is lighter, but this is the only one I've got anymore. But basically, I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to help you guys visualize what that cone looks like with this band. So I'm going to loop this around Hobie's shoulders, right? Back up a little bit. Yeah. So, but this is connected to my shoulder, right? It's real hard to hold up. So these lines, basically, my sword has to come back. Move their arms now. Whoa! So basically, if I swing my sword, it has to come back into this cone, right? If Hobie wants to block, all he needs to do is put his hand on the edge of that cone, right? Because the sword has to come back in to the cone to be able to hit him, right? Dude, my shoulder's getting really tight. So I'm gonna hold it like this. So imagine my shoulder being here, right? Because I need to gesticulate with this hand. So my sword needs to come back into this cone. Now, why is this cool, right? Well, Hobie, if he slants his shoulders, see how it changed a little bit? Yeah, slant it the other way. It changed a little bit there. So it's basically situated to how his torso is oriented, right? Rotate your shoulders. See how it gets narrower? This way, go flat. Cone is broader, turn the other way. Gets narrower again, right? So essentially, what this cone does is a visualization technique for if you get hit. This tells you where your hand needed to be in space to be able to block, right? So another way of demonstrating what that looks like is if we take our sword, right? And I just do the straightest possible shot to him. That's the arc of one side of the cone, right? So he has two ways to block this. Actually, many ways to block this, but two primary ways to block this. He can have his hand towards me, right? As far as he can, and lift my sword off of him. That's a block, right? Or he can put his hand close to him, put your sword down, pull it back up close to your body and block. He can put his hand there, right, to block it that way. And you see how his hand, put it forward again. See how his hand moves back along that arc of the cone, right? So it's not enough for him to like raise it up or anything like that. He has to be on the outside of that edge to block. Same here with his cross body shot, right? If he's close, he has to put his hand here. If he's far away, he has to put his hand there. Now what we're gonna do, I need a little bit of help, I need some people with swords, is we're gonna demonstrate economizing towards defense and economizing towards attack by moving your hand around in this space, right? So I need 3 more people. So just come on up. Okay, stand behind Hobie, right? Okay, so we're just going to demonstrate all of the places that he could block those 2 shots, right? And we're going to demonstrate what that cone means in terms of economizing your defense. We're going to go for him blocking back here first. And I'm going to show you that shape, right? So if I put this here on his body, okay, so don't move. What you're going to do is try to grab this pommel right here, hold it in space without moving. And then get him your sword. Okay, so if I throw to this side of his body and he has that close guard, right? Do the same thing, hold that there. Okay, give him your sword. Okay, this represents his hands being close to his body and blocking either side. You guys following that? A little weird, right? I just love weird stuff. Okay, now we're going to talk about what defense looks like if his hand is extended into that cone, so his hand is as far towards me as it possibly can go. So, drawing that same shot, his hand's out here, come around, try to stay behind Hobie, but grab it, go down. I need one more person. Okay. Now, if I throw over here, your hand is extended as far as it can go.
How many swords?
Right? Okay, so you guys stay here. We're gonna go to tavern. Okay, come over here. Everybody circle around this stuff. Give the camera a view, right?
You got it?
Yeah.
So this was actually not more like. You guys are drifting trying to spit. That's cool. Okay, so these 2 swords, right? We have an extended hand position deep into that cone, right? These 2 front swords. These 2 swords back here. We have a recessed position back into that cone. So what can we deduce between these 2 pairs of swords? Remember, here's a pair and here's a pair. What can we deduce about this cone? Detective work.
Smaller.
Yeah. When is it closer?
When it's towards the person.
So when swords deep into the cone, the 2 guards are closer to each other, right? When he's back, or he's closer to his own body, the swords are farther apart horizontally, right? Okay, well, what if I fake at him, right? And what if he knows I'm gonna fake at him? And he doesn't know where I'm gonna throw, but he knows I'm gonna try to trick him into picking the wrong quadrant to block. What guard should he use if he knows I'm gonna fake on him?
The further out. 'Cause he
The
has
Leo.
to move
Yeah, the extended one. Why?
Because it covers more.
He can it's a shorter distance to
Yes,
get
there's
back.
a shorter distance between the two. So if he's wrong, it's much easier to switch, and he gets an extra couple of milliseconds if his hands are far out like this. If his hands are close to his body, it takes longer to switch. That makes sense to you guys? So that's why, now you have to understand that this block back here, if it stops a shot, it works, right? Because our theory in the dojo is if you're dead, you got nothing to complain about. If they blocked you, you got nothing to complain about, right? So there's no doing it wrong, but we want to see the value and the difference of putting our hand forward or backwards. So what's an advantage, another advantage of putting our hand back here? Once you grab one of those swords, any one of them, what's the advantage of having his arm back here?
Cock to swing.
It's easier to swing, right? He's back here and he's ready to swing. Grab that again.
It's also,
Grab this one. It's also what? Who's talking? What's up?
I was gonna say, it's less likely for them to hit your arm.
It's less likely. I wouldn't say it's less likely to hit the arm in the general sense because it depends on where you put it and your timing. I think it's if this extended position is in the right space, it's equally likely, right? So it depends on the context of the fight. So I don't think we could draw that conclusion. It's easier for him to switch, but the guard isn't necessarily structurally better. It's just economized towards defense. So what is it? So he can switch back and forth between the two, right? And that does make it less likely to get hit in the arm if you can switch back and forth between the two. You are right about that part, right? What's the trouble with this part? Like having your hand forward.
Less offense.
Leaves you more exposed.
Yeah, you can't really swing. Like you're extended, and the best you can do is like kind of pull him. So you have to come back and throw. So you guys have a decision to make when you're fighting, right? You have a decision to make, like which position do I want to be in, right? And you use the cone to figure out this position. So if you're in the cone, if you're looking at the cone and your hand isn't on the outside edge of it, like if he's fully extended, right? But he moves his hand over like this, well, he's not on the edge of the cone. And if you're not on the edge of the cone, you don't have a block. If you're not on the edge of the cone, you're not blocking anything. Does that make sense? So basically what you do is, nobody visualizes the cone while they're fighting, right? That's too much processing power to see something that's not there. And I imagine without PCP, we're not going to be able to do it. So, but what you use that for is if you get hit, you can replay in your mind, oh, that's where the cone was. I needed to be up a little bit. I needed to be outside a little bit, right? And you'll notice that he's not just coming straight back. These angles go out that way. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So what I want you guys to do next is partner up. We're going to do a little bit more exploration, right? This is where I love that part where everyone's like, this is my
Straight back, straight back.
So you're going to partner up, Puff.
Yes.
And I want you guys to think about it this way, right? We're going to explore the cone a little bit. I'm going to put my sword on him, right? And he's going to say, okay, well, if I want that shot to not contact, yeah, he's going to do the close guard, right? Where do you put your hand to do the far guard? Yeah, and you want to get just enough, right? But I don't want you to, yes, this will block that shot. I want you to get like the minimum, right? So start flat, do an extended guard, just enough to lift my sword off. Yes, right there, that will block. Okay, put down, close guard. That will block too. So go ahead and explore that. Put your sword on your partner's body and have them just lift it off in a close position, an extended position, middle positions. You can like kind of just, you can extend the guard, extend it, and then you can ride it back like that to see the edge of the cone. So partner up and explore that space a little bit. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is statistics, right? Not the next, the last. We're going to talk about statistics. But we're going to talk about statistics in terms of returns. What's a return? Does anybody know what a return is?
What'd you get out of it?
A shot you throw after a block.
When you strike back.
What's a return, Mike?
A shot after a block.
It's a shot after a block, right? So a return is like, hey, I just blocked. Where's this dude going to throw back? And I always like to liken this, right, to baseball players, right? You guys ever see people play baseball? How fast do they pitch their sand balls? Like 90 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, right? Do you think that they look the ball onto the bat? No, they don't do that. They read the pitcher's body language, and they take all the rest of the context of the play and the pitcher's preferences, the pitcher's positioning, and they make an educated guess as to where that pitcher is going to pitch. Why do they do that? Your eyes can't take photographs fast enough to track a 100-mile-an-hour ball. You can't do that. Your brain can like try to piece it together and make you think you're doing that. Your eyes typically, they just don't react that fast, right? So you do like a lot of reading and a lot of statistical analysis in your subconscious mind to figure out, where is this dude going to throw back at me? Where should I block? And I'll tell you, a lot of the time, the good fighters that are really strong at Blockstrike, and that is steadily becoming more and more of you, they have a strong statistical understanding for what shots are likely to come back at them after they throw. So that's good. That's what we call returns, right? And we could do a little bit of analysis, particularly in Blockstrike, grind, ABA, and BAB, on what's likely to come back at us based on a few criteria. So we have 3 categories of returns, right? We have a primary return, a secondary return, and a tertiary return. Return 1, return 2, return 3. That makes sense? Primary, secondary, tertiary. You have some unique qualities that'll help you pick out which one's which. So, Rock, you want to stand like right there? Okay, so in essence, I swing at Rock, and he blocks. Okay, so I need to make a judgment call about the position that I'm in right now, right? I need to stop and think, where is he going to throw back at me, right? Like, he has a nice defense. I'm fully extended. I've thrown. I've used my kinetic energy. I need to figure out where he's going to hit me back before he tries to do it, right? So if we're at top quadrant range, I need to consider the primary return, and that means the thing that is most likely to come back at me from this position. And that has a few properties. The primary return is basically your best shot. Like, that's the way to think of it. Your best, fastest shot. So I could do a little bit of thinking from this position and think, okay, well, I know the primary return does not typically cross the plane of the sword. That means he's not going to go this way. He's not going to go out around this way because it has to like kind of go around my stick. And that's hard, and it's going to take more time than it is to just throw to some other location. I also know that the primary return is typically high, right? So if we're at that top quadrant's range, where that sphere of range first started to intersect like his body and his arm, right? And he can't reach my hips, I think his primary return is probably going to be my chest from this position, right? So he's going to throw back there. Now, why is that a good choice? If he tries to throw to my arm, like the inside of my forearm, right? He has to throw a wrap shot, and it takes a little bit more time. Since I have a backhand and my hand is covering this spot, it's hard for him to go inside here. So it's very likely that he's going to come to my chest, right? So that's my primary return from this position. It's my chest. You're going to throw my chest. Primary return. I will show you a couple examples of primary returns to help you guys figure that out. So if I throw a flat cross at Rock like this, and he blocks it, don't do anything. Don't look at any of the GC Express bits. Where do you think, I want Hita, just step forward. What do you think is the most likely spot that he's going to throw back at?
Forearm.
He's going to throw back at my forearm. Why?
It's the easiest location, just following it.
Easiest shot, fast location. Doesn't cross the plate of my sword, right? So go ahead, throw it there. That's correct. Okay, now I'm going to throw at his forearm area again, but I'm going to change my hand height, right? So if I throw like this, that was the shot that I just threw. And we decided, hey, that primary return was my forearm. If I throw high like this and wrap over, do you think the primary return... Pulse, why don't you come forward? Pulse, do you think the primary return is still going to be up here?
No,
Why not?
because he'd have to go like it wouldn't hit.
He'd have to go over top, right? That section's cut off. So my end hand position is the thing that dictates which return is most likely to come back. Do not confuse that with the return that has to come back, because that's not true. It dictates the return that is most likely to come back. So we can start drawing some conclusions about where he's going to throw back at me based on where my sword ends up, right? So that's you can sit down. That was a good answer. And see, did you guys notice how I threw at the same spot with 2 different shots, but those primary returns were different, right? The most effective thing it hit me with was different. Does that make sense to you guys? It was different based on where my hand position was. So we have a secondary return, right? Which is the suboptimal choice. Not the wrong choice, the suboptimal choice, right? So if I threw this way, right, we had decided that this was my primary return. The secondary return crosses the plane of the sword, right, and is still typically high. So where do you think? Let's get Ursus. We decided that my primary return was right here from this position. Where is my secondary return going to be?
Probably chest.
Probably what?
Chest.
My chest. Why is that less optimal than throwing here?
Less optimal? Or-
Yeah, why is it, it's still a good shot, why is it not quite as good as throwing over here?
You either have to push his sword down or wrap around it. To
Yeah.
the chest.
So he has to push my sword down to throw at the chest, or he has to go outside around it, right? And the important part was, it added virtually any details, right? So it became a less savory option. Still a good option, but not the fastest one, not the sharpest one, not the best one, right? So, again, if I, remember, we just threw this flat cross here. If I throw this high wrap up this way, right? Primary return. What was the primary return here? Primary return was just chest. Yeah, there you go. What's the secondary return for this thrash?
Under the arm to your side.
Under the arm to the side. Yeah. Why is that less optimal than throwing here? Go ahead. Why don't you put your sword in my body?
Covers more distance.
What?
Covers more distance.
It's longer. Yeah. Do you notice what he did with his hand?
Oh, I see.
How he had to drop his hand, or sorry, lift his hand up to create that coverage. He did it instinctively because he's good. But what if he didn't? What if he just went flat? See why that's less optimal now? He might get hit doing that, right? So your secondary return crosses the plane of the sword. It's less optimal. It might get you hit. Not always, but it might. But the important part of that was he had to account for more variables, right? The primary return doesn't need to account for a whole lot. It's just the best, most open shot. The secondary return had to account for more of those variables. And the tertiary return is a category. It's not one shot. It's not one location. It's many locations. And the tertiary returns basically covers anything else that could happen, right? What qualities does that have? Well, the shots are typically lower. They're typically like a little loopier or kind of goofy and require a little bit more positioning of the body, like leaning or dropping at the knees. And it accounts for all of the other possibilities that can happen. So show me a tertiary return from this shot. Yeah, he can go that way if he wants to. Show me another. Yeah, he can go that way if he wants to. You got another one? Yeah, he can wrap over that way if he feels like it. Does that make sense? So what did you notice about those shots? Natasha, did you notice anything specific about those shots? Like, what did they have in common? All different quadrants, there were different shots, but did they have anything in common?
They took more effort.
It took more effort. He had to move more. For that last shot, he had to pop up. For the other ones, he had to dip down and shift his body. And anytime you make more motion, you're typically always just a little bit slower, right? Okay, so that's nice, Tato. Thanks again. What's that good for? Here's what that's good for, right? What you do when you block strike, right, which is foundational to what we do, is you are trying to build a mental schema of the possible returns from every end hand position, right? That's what your brain is subconsciously doing. That's why Blockstrike makes you better without you thinking terribly hard about it. It builds a schema for every possible return in those end hand position, from those end hand positions, unless you start filing on what ones are statistically most likely to come, what ones are not less likely to come, what's even less likely to come, right? So they have some qualities, and you can use a typical kind of like rule of thumb after you throw each shot to help you start to cover those, right? So the rule of thumb, and this isn't something I made up. I wish I was this smart, but I'm not. This was taught to me by spin. So once you've identified your primary return, your secondary return, and your tertiary returns plural, this is how you work on it. when you throw, you move immediately to that primary return, like whatever would block that shot that's coming back at you. Don't wait to see what happens. Don't like wait to see if he goes for it. Just go to it, right? Watch for the secondary return to come and switch if you need to. And with enough training, those tertiary shots that require bigger movement, lifting up, dropping down, with enough training, you should be able to see those coming. And you'll notice when you do some more of those low shots, but slow, and stop in the end hand position. So go ahead. Well, remember, where did our cone of attack come from? Where was the point of the cone of attack? Do you remember?
Shoulder.
The shoulder, right? So, do you see where his shoulder moved? We could kind of judge that that cone of attack just moved drastically, right? So that's how we could start to read those tertiary attacks, those tertiary returns. So, again, the rule of thumb is when I throw, I move immediately to the primary return, and I'm not looking to see what happens. I'm just going there because I know that it's statistically most likely. I'm watching for his secondary return to come in case I need to switch to that guard. And then the tertiary return, if he switches, I should be able to follow it because it's longer and it's slower. So this is the final exercise for this class. It wore on a little long. Sorry, I restructured it to get more sweet, like mathematical stuff. This is my first time going through this. Thanks for bearing with me. You're gonna get with your partner. You're gonna throw a shot and hold that in hand position. And you're gonna talk it through. What do you think is a primary return, a secondary return, and what are some tertiary returns? Does that make sense to you guys? Any questions on that? And remember, it's not always what you feel will be the primary or secondary return. It's what fits those criteria. Primary returns are typically high. They're the fastest, most efficient shots. They typically don't cross the plane of the sword. Secondary returns are not quite as fast, but they're still a good choice. And they do cross the plane of the sword and are still usually high. Tertiary returns, everything else. Most low shots. That makes sense? Bring it up. Try it out. Yeah.
Can you please define plane of the sword?
Plane of the sword. Just wherever my sword's out in space. Remember that triangular plane? This
Okay.
edge right here. So like if I throw here, right, and I'm a little bit high, my sword kind of forms like a line here or a plane. If he wanted to throw secondary over top, you see how he had to lift up and over it and get around it? Whereas if he went primary and did not cross that plane, like he came out around, he doesn't have to like accommodate for it quite as much. That makes sense?
Your sword went down for that.
That's
Okay.
your question?
I think so.
Let it process for a little bit. It's a weird thing to think about. But the neat part is, if you don't think about it and you just block strike, a lot of the time you'll still start understanding it and building those schemas before you really understand why it's happening. But kind of hone in onto that block strike. Be like, what's most likely to come from this position? If you're confused on something, discuss it with your partner. Be like, do you think this is a primary return? Is it the best one? Like maybe what you think is a primary return isn't what that other dude is most likely to throw. Like if I was fighting Rock, who were similar to the same height, although I am much taller than him on Tinder, like maybe the primary return is gonna be something, but if I throw the same shot on Mazaeus, like maybe that primary return is different because he's looking down at me from his giant mountain of tallness, and he might see things that I don't see. Does that make sense? Go ahead, break up, try those out. Fastest, right?
Yeah.
They're the best, right?
Yeah.
No.
Not necessarily.
You're not the best. If you pick the best option all of the time, what happens?
You become a warlord.
What? I heard warlord. No. No. You become perfectly predictable, right? Because your opponent is also going to know what those best options are with any cursory amount of training. And what I think is funny is like what I just showed you guys today in the Blockstrike that we've done. Like when I got my warlord 5 years ago, that was all I needed. You know what I mean? Like I just Blockstriked everyone out and they're like, Tato, you're a hero and you're the best. And it's funny because now that's like just a basic thing that all of y'all know how to do, which is funny to me. Like that's how fast this stuff advances. So you need to understand that you can't throw primary all the time. Like you can do that when someone hasn't done a lot of Blockstrike. If you're trying to do that against someone who has, you're gonna get beat up. Because they know what the best option is, right? There's no way of like hiding that if you throw back right away. right? So what does this do? This lets you take this tool, right, this statistical analysis, and when you do block strike in your intervals, this starts teaching you about what kinds of shots to throw, like what's likely to come back. If you get hit in a fight, you could be like, was that a primary or secondary or tertiary return? So like this was an advanced class, and I know I saw a lot of confused faces. Like this is you guys are, most of you guys who've been doing the ants for like a year or so are ready for this tool. This is just a presentation of like a toolbox for you guys to begin to like a mechanic, like deconstruct your fights, work on them, tune them up, make little changes. This is the way that you figure out like, oh, my hand should have been 2 inches higher and I would have hit that block because the cone wasn't where I thought it was, right? Or, you know, I thought I was in the safe zone, but really I was in the bias zone. I need to stand a little bit further back. Like, have you ever lost a fight and been like, I don't know why I lost?
Every time.
That's right? Yeah, when you have a toolbox like this that lets you start understanding the geometry and understanding the statistics, those answers start to present themselves to you. So we have time for a couple quick questions. We ran over. Thank you guys for sticking around. Does anybody have any questions? Well, I'm assuming that I'm the best teacher in the world then, which is reasonable. No questions? Okay, thank you guys very much for attending this class. I think Glenn's class is at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and you guys need to be here because it's a lefty fighting class. Some of you guys are left-handed, but there's been this dude coming down winning all the tournaments, and he's left-handed. You can stop him. Come to that class. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right,